meeting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk proceed with the roll call?
Council members Kluwer and Stearns are absent. Councilmember Collins?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Redmond?
Here.
Mayor Sackler?
Here. All right, we move into item number 3, special presentations. We have Tom Hesseldins here to give us a presentation regarding a draft proposal for the North Mount Shasta Boulevard Chestnut one-way couplet and the daylighting of Castle Creek. Go ahead, Tom.
I'll start with Castle Street. So this is an update on what the ad hoc committee has been working on that council established last July. On Castle Street, it started out with a discussion of a park on the 100 East block in front of Ace Hardware. And the ad hoc committee decided to pursue, or at least look into, the alternative of not taking away all the parking on that block, but looking into taking away part of it, enough to daylight the creek. And while we were at it, we looked at the other blocks all the way from Sisson Meadow down to the freeway, because back in 1990, I'd worked for the Merrill family, Morgan Merrill developers, when Burger King went in and they were required to do some wetland mitigation. So at that time, we established a Shasta Creek Greenway behind Burger King and a Bear Creek, or a Cold Creek Greenway behind the Black Bear Diner. The city now owns that part of the greenway behind Black Bear Diner. The school kids at the elementary school named the creek behind Burger King Shasta Creek. So even though I'm talking about Castle Street, if it were to become a greenway, you might want to consider naming it the Shasta Creek Greenway, in part because the beauty of this idea of a daylighted creek all the way down Castle is that the water's coming from the mountain. The mountain is an integral part of this city. That view looking right up Castle Street is right at the mountain. So if the creek itself were named Shasta Creek, it would all tie together nicely. But this gives a sense of the whole scope potentially. Sisson Meadow at the upper right and the elementary school down in the lower left. So what I'd like to do now is go block by block. This is just below Sisson Meadow. Chuck Ryan, real estate appraiser, bought the old Pissarro farmhouse at the head of Castle Street and is very supportive of the idea of actually eliminating the street itself and converting it into a shared driveway, a greenway with the creek daylighted through there, and an 8-foot wide multi-use trail for the public that would then extend up the alley and over to Alma Street. And council a few years ago, I think, had a conversation about closing off that alley to vehicular traffic. So this would formalize that. It would still be accessible by emergency vehicles, maintenance vehicles, but otherwise it would be pedestrian and bicycle only. And that would be from Alder Street all the way up. And right now, people going to Sisson Meadow can park on the right side of Castle Street. Chuck Ryan actually bought the duplex and painted some parking stalls there to provide some parking, but that parking could be relocated along Alder Street. Next slide, please. This is the 200 East block between Alder and Chestnut, and if the creek were to be daylighted along this part of Castle Street, it would make more sense to do it on the left side, as you see there, because that's where the culvert currently runs, and it has less impact on driveways. There would be a loss of, I believe, 10 parking spaces. I have this all worked out in a chart, but if the private landowner between the alley and Alder Street were willing to sell, there would be the possibility of doing 2 different types of parking there. The one that I show utilizes the alley with double-ranked 90-degree parking, but the portion of that that's behind Crave Barbecue is sensitive because that's where the barbecue pit is now, and it could be employee parking. But the other alternative is to have that parking be centered on the private parcel between the alley and the Simpson duplex up there by Elder Street, if the landowner were willing to sell. And I should point out here that the ad hoc committee completely agreed. There's no intent by anybody to use eminent domain. This is willing buyer-seller. It's all based on what does the community want, first of all, whether or not they want a greenway at all, and if so, how much. And then how do we mitigate for lost parking, recognizing that parking is the biggest single issue with this. Next slide. This is the most sensitive block in front of Ace Hardware, where the whole block at one point was proposed to be a park. Mountain Runners was advocating that for a number of years. It was controversial for obvious reasons because of the parking. They ended up buying the property where Parker Plaza is now as a fallback approach, but they did get the utilities undergrounded, and they put those planter boxes in the middle. They were going to plant trees, and I said, well, you might reconsider that because they'll block the view, but also if you were to daylight this creek in the future, they would be in the way. So that's why you have those planter boxes that are there now. On this block, it would make the most sense to put the greenway down the center, and the parallel parking that's on each side could be converted to angle parking. There's about 44 parking spaces there now, including ADA parking spaces, so you would lose half of them. The most logical way to mitigate for that would be on the Brownell property to the left, which council approved staff negotiating with Alan Brownell on the potential acquisition of that property for parking, recognizing that there would be a benefit to creating parking in this vicinity in the downtown area, whether or not the greenway itself were done, or as I'll talk about next, the whole idea of a couplet, one-way traffic. So that would be the single most important property for acquisition, and we have a willing seller. And on this block, I've had conversations with city staff about the issues regarding snow removal, and it's advantageous to not have bump outs, peninsulas, islands that are raised and planted, but just to simply have painted striping for parking stalls and gaps in between. But with the greenway, if it were to be built out, perhaps we could have an exception right where the greenway crosses Mount Shasta Boulevard and Chestnut. So that's what I show here. But the parking that you see on Mount Shasta Boulevard and Chestnut on this drawing is your existing parking. On the couplet drawings that I'll get to later, you can see what it would look like if they were both one way. Next slide, please. This is the 100 West block. It would fit much better, the alignment to be on the Napa Auto Parts side of it. And not surprisingly, Napa doesn't really like the idea of losing the parking in front of the building. This is going to be a sensitivity with numerous business owners, and we do want to have a follow-up with community outreach to give the community plenty of opportunity to give input on this. What you can see below the cardiology building, the trail leaves the sidewalk and swings around and goes under the tracks. And I have 1-foot contour mapping from USGS that shows that this actually would be feasible if the railroad would agree to it. It would be feasible grade-wise if the railroad would agree to it. And it's fairly common to have pedestrian and bicycle undercrossings under railroad tracks in other communities. So it's not a far-fetched idea, it's just something new to Mount Shasta. Next slide. This part of Castle Street is in not very good condition. When Alpine Realty bought the old house there and turned it into a real estate office, they put in parking on the right. You can see 4 spaces there. And then what Dignity Health has now in terms of the Mercy building, that parking was put in maybe 10 years ago. The alley in between, the Catholic Church actually had asked for it to be vacated when they bought the Hannah House and put in the parking there. And Gino Marconi was involved at the time, and I said, Gino, that's where we want to route the downtown to City Park Trail. And he said, yeah, fine, we should definitely keep the city ownership of that alley. So that's a whole other project that at some point we need to have more conversations on, but that would be a logical routing coming through from the city park through town and all the way down to Lake Siskiyou and tying in with the landing at the south end of town. So this would be a major intersection if that were all to come to pass. Next, thank you. Here, the dentist office is relatively new. They had worked with the city for the vacating of that part of Castle Street. So half of it went to them and half of it to the Green residents. The dentist had to avoid some wetlands and do some wetland mitigation, so they didn't build out into all of their acquired land from the city right-of-way. So it actually works out well to redo their wetland mitigation to have the flowing creek. And it currently daylights right down by the Rodriguez residence, and from there down to the freeway, it's above ground. And then down just beyond Rite Aid is where Morgan Merrill Developers actually created a separate parcel for the Greenway that includes the large area where I identified the possibility of a stormwater mitigation area, which would be a shallow detention basin that would be empty most of the time. But right now, all of the runoff from the Rite Aid and Sports and Spirits parking lot and buildings runs out into Lake Street. And this would be a great opportunity to intercept that and slow it down and filter it through vegetation. And then also on the lower left is Mount Shasta Elementary School. And one of the board members mentioned to me recently that the school district is interested in doing some wetland restoration on part of their huge lawn area and using it as a learning center for the kids. And that would tie right into the Greenway concept. And there's also a possibility of a Greenway Trail reaching over to Alma Street in that vicinity, there's actually an existing right-of-way that would allow for that connection. But I didn't continue these drawings further because for the purposes of what we're talking about now, I wanted to focus on Castle Street itself and what the fate of it would be. And in all these drawings, you probably noticed the widened areas connected with narrow channels. And the design that I would recommend would be a pool drop, riffle pool type arrangement where it would be exaggerated to some extent from what you would find in nature, and the channel bottom and pool bottoms would be lined with geotechnical fabric and rock to make them highly resistant to erosion. And then for the 100 East block up by Ace Hardware, there could be a recirculating pump system to enhance the flow if you wanted, and other communities have done this. So it doesn't matter what the existing flow is, you just pick up water from the bottommost pool and circulate it around to the top. So for that one block, you could have even more of a water feature impact. And then in terms of parking impacts, there's a total of potentially losing 56 spaces if you were to build out the whole thing. In some blocks, it's more than others. And part of what I counted included parking that's not marked with striping so far, but a de facto parallel parking, for example, the 300 East block of Castle Street up there by the Pissarro farmhouse. So I was trying to capture everything I could to capture the full potential impact. And then I have at the bottom a number of potential mitigation sites, with the Brownell property being really important. On Alder Street itself, on the far side from the duplexes, there's no sidewalk there now. You could put in a sidewalk and parallel parking all the way along there, get 17 spaces there alone. Brownell's property, you could get 38 spaces. The property down by the Alder, you could get 16. There's a possibility of Banner Bank in their lawn area, if they were willing, another 9 spaces. I think there's ample opportunity for parking mitigation. So where I'm recommending this go next is to continue with the ad hoc committee, but initiate a public outreach program, have one or more meetings to give the public a chance to review all of this and give feedback. I have written up a narrative, and I have all of these drawings that could be presented to the public, circulated to the public, and go through that process and then report back to council. And if at that time it seems that there's a worthwhile project in some form, even if it were just one block, that at that time we would ask council for authorization for staff to move ahead with grant writing. So let's jump to the couplet. This is a lot of information in rapid order, but like I said, I do have these written up. I have a narrative and drawings for the couplet as well. Could you go back one slide? This is the whole couplet, so it would be all of Chestnut Street and the corresponding portion of Mount Shasta Boulevard, which for people like me who have lived here for so long and driven it so often, it just seems like such a natural. But there's obviously a lot of considerations, and in recent years, one of the considerations has become the issue of bicycle transportation. And right now the city has a Class 2 bikeway, well, on both sides of Mount Shasta Boulevard, where riders ride between parked cars and flowing traffic. And those Class 2 bikeways are about 5 feet wide each. With one way, you would have the opportunity to not only separate out the bikeways on the corresponding one-way streets, but also just have it on one side of each of those streets. So the slides that follow will show all of that. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is at the southeast end where it initially splits by Bistro 107. And Pace had raised some concerns about McLeod Avenue intersection being so close, but I don't see why this wouldn't work in and of itself. But, you know, basically cars heading northwest would continue on Chestnut Street, and then Mount Shasta Boulevard would be the opposing traffic. So that would be where the initial split would be. One of the key decision points in all of this is that once you're on one way, would you still have one lane for that direction of traffic, or would you go with two? And 2 lanes would actually fit. And there's pros and cons of that. And Todd and I recognized at the beginning that we need a traffic engineer who is specialized in active transportation, specifically this concept of what would be called a Class 4 bikeway or a separated bikeway, where the bikeway is between the parked cars and the sidewalk. And that's what these illustrations show here, the dashed red lines. And so in order to do a separated bikeway, per design code, you need 3 feet of what they call a buffer zone between the parked cars and the bikeway to avoid cyclists being doored, to use the term that cyclists use where somebody opens their door and a cyclist runs into it. And then the bikeway itself would be 7 feet wide, and then your sidewalk would be whatever you have existing. And city sidewalks now vary between 5 feet wide, and some of them are up to 10. In fact, you can see a transition here going from 5 to 10 right at Orem Street. Next slide, please. So on this block, 300 block, the city does own this parking lot right in the middle of the block. And right now you can park off the alley separate from the parking access by Chestnut Street, but going one way and kind of cleaning up the traffic flow, you would lose a little bit of parking in adjusting this, but not much. Ace Hardware has made it very clear that they need to have access down the rest of the alley for deliveries and for pickups. So with the design of the greenway, that's why I left it wide where the alley crosses. And in this case, as you have now, that little bit in the middle there by the greenway would be 2-way traffic, because you would retain your one-way the way it's split currently on that block of Castle Street. But as you can see at the top left, when you're heading up on the 200 block of Castle, it would be one way, and similarly down the 100 West block below Mount Shasta Boulevard. And I failed to mention that when we were going through the greenway changes, but that's another significant consideration would be the change in traffic flow associated with the greenway, irrespective of the couplet. Next slide, please. So for the 400 block, we're moving beyond the greenway by one block now, and you can see where the Brownell property parking would be, which would be integral to the downtown area and in the middle of the couplet. You can see the bikeways, Mount Shasta Boulevard bikeway heading southeast to the right, Chestnut bikeway heading northwest, heading towards the left of the drawing. There are specialized ways to design these at intersections. I just showed the dashed line going through. Sometimes the bikeways themselves are painted green. There are concerns, I breezed by it here, I'm trying to get through this quickly, but at Lake Street and here again at Alma Street, Pace has pointed out, and Alta also pointed out the need for some sort of signalization at these intersections. So this would suggest revisiting all of the signals for Alma and Lake relative to going one way. How that would change the signals, is there an opportunity to simplify, what would the costs be? Again, this is where a traffic engineer comes in. So we're just doing preliminary work at this point in time. Next slide, please. So as we move out of town to the northwest, you can see how Mount Shasta Boulevard is narrow and it widens out right before Alma. The property that Tadina now owns between Mount Shasta Boulevard and the railroad has been for sale. You could get quite a few parking spaces on that property, as many as 50. Now that's not right in the downtown area, but depending on the kind of couplet design, you may want yet more parking or not. But I wanted to look at all of the opportunities in the vicinity, so that's why I drew this in. So that shows what it would look like if it were done. Next block, please. So moving further out to the northwest, Mount Shasta Boulevard is much narrower. If you wanted to have what they call a Class 4 bikeway or separated bikeway, you could do that. You could put in a sidewalk, but there's not enough width to also have parallel parking on the bikeway side of the street. You could retain all the parallel parking on the other side of the street. And I should point out that if you were to simply just go one way on both of these streets, there would be no loss of parking. It just changes traffic flow. If you put in the bikeway and wanted 2 lanes of one-way traffic on each street, there would be some parking loss, but not, I think it's a total of 24, less than half as much as from the Greenway project. But if you just had one way of traffic each direction, you could actually increase parking over existing. So that's one of the key questions here for the community and for a traffic engineer is how would the traffic load be? Alta did a preliminary stab at it in their mobility plan for the city, and they concluded that the level of service would work. Their concern was with the intersections and that there were ways to make that work as well. I think we have one more slide. So this is where the northwest split, where you go back to being 2-way on Mount Shasta Boulevard. And with this block, I had previously done the design work for Danco for the Affordable Housing Project, and we came up with an initial design trying to figure out how are we going to deal with the potential for future bikeway improvements. And we came up with a 12-foot wide sidewalk where the sidewalk would be shared with bicycles. So I took a look at it again more recently and came up with a system of a separated bikeway, not having the angle parking that was included in the Danco project, but going with the parallel parking, which still fits with their parking requirements under the state legislation pertaining to affordable housing. So, but this needs to be revisited as well. And another thing I'll say about bicycling is you've all seen the proliferation of e-bikes and e-scooters, and the guy that is on the e-wheel, that's unicycle thing that seems absolutely crazy, but I think this is the beginning of the future where if the city makes changes in its streets to accommodate more bicycle use that would include e-bikes, you're going to see less traditional vehicular activity on the streets proper. You're going to see more use of bikeways than what has been found traditionally. In fact, Todd told me about a study that Federal Highways had done where only 5% of the use in cities for some of these new bikeways facilities was people on bicycles. So with that low of a percentage, it begs the question, do you really want to do this? But if that usage is going to increase, and if this town in particular wants more of a walk, bike type downtown area, this is the direction you'd want to be considering. So again, that's part of the community outreach, and that covers everything that I wanted to throw at you in 10 or 15 minutes. But I have it all written up. I sent it to Todd. He could circulate it to council. A lot of work to do here for everyone to digest it, think about it. I mean, Ken's been helping a little, but I know he's been busy with Public Works, but we really need Ken's feedback on this as well, not only as an engineer or civil engineer, but also as a cyclist. So anyway, that's where we're at now. Do you have any questions?
But of course. You've seen this.
I know this. I'm a proponent, I'll be quite honest. I'm a proponent.
Yeah, thank you, yeah.
Would you do me a favor and scroll back to some of the first slides where the original park daylighting of Castle Creek that was going to be across from Ace Hardware and that little section between Chestnut and Mount Shasta Boulevard?
Yeah, there it is. Oop, there it is. Nope. There. Yeah, that block. So Jeffrey has shared with me in some meetings in the past that your idea of some commercial development on.
Well, let me.
Oh,
there's
yeah,
some
go ahead.
questions
Yeah.
that I had and some that I need to get your feedback on. And first of all, thank you. It looks, there's a tremendous amount of work that's done here. And for all Ken and whoever else is involved in putting all this together, thank you very much. It helps me, this being the first time I've seen it, really kind of wrap my head around all the potential changes that could happen. And I heard you say about that parking is the most important thing, and Lord knows if you've lived a couple of decades in this town, people get really wound up about parking, and it is certainly important. And in the course of the presentation, it dawned on me that, and if you stay for the rest of the meeting, you'll hear that we're going to lose $1 million. We'll be $1 million in the hole relative to the little business that's Mount Shasta City, about $470,000 through June of last year and about $525,000 through June of this year. We'll lose right at around $1 million. And what that does is it tends to focus my mind on when projects get presented to ask the question, how is this going to help Mount Shasta increase its revenues? And there are only and ever two answers. More tourists, which brings increased hotel tax and sales tax, or more people who will move here, which brings more property tax and sales tax. And given the fact that we're gonna discuss that we're gonna lose $1 million just last year and this year, I'm kind of focused on how can any project help Mount Shasta increase its revenues such that we can head back towards balanced budgets. And there are so many different projects that are kind of in this project. And again, I want to thank you, Tom. There's a heck of a lot of work on how this and that might occur, and from bump outs to daylighting to goodness gracious, how to accommodate for parking. It's a tremendous amount of work, and for all those, because I don't know, other than yourself who may be involved, I want to thank you. And I want to have some mindfulness about how projects can bring revenue, and where's the how we pay for this, which of course will involve grants to some degree, but given our current situation and likely longer term situation, how do we, where do we attract revenue? And more tourists, more people moving here. That's the only two ways that we can make our three sources of revenue, hotel, sales, and property tax, go up, because that's how we exist as a business called the city. And I just wanted to kind of share that perspective, because this really helps. It really kind of helped focus my mind on, wow, how might we do that? And yes, I've shared some ideas with you about how that might happen, but we don't need to get into that now. I'm grateful that you spent the time to take us all through this, and City Manager, if you'd be so kind as to shoot this to us, it'd be great to have this.
Can do.
And thank you. I really do appreciate it.
So you refreshed my memory that I failed to mention that another one of the next steps is an economic analysis, and that is crucial. I totally agree. So for comparing couplets to two-way traffic and how that's affected other communities, and then also greenways, and work I've done in the past on greenways, there's some really interesting work that demonstrates increase in property values, increase in economic activity, but I need to get the most current information on that and provide that to the community, to council, and to everybody else, because you're exactly right. This not only needs to pay for itself, but it needs to be a net benefit. If it's not a net benefit, it's not worth the trouble.
And again, thank you. Appreciate all your hard work on this.
Yeah. You're welcome.
No, so I appreciate the hard work you put into this.
Thank you.
City Manager, do you have some questions?
No, just thanks, Tom. I think just to give some perspective here, the daylighting of Castle Creek and the element of wetland restoration and is kind of a demonstration project, and is something that with non-traditional grant sources, it's something that I think that we can chase and be pretty successful with. The one-way couplet idea, since it's really a change in traffic pattern, if that's all we were doing, since it's going to be a multi-million-dollar project, we'd have a really tough time finding grant money for it. And so the one place that we have a lot of grant money currently available and has been for a while is if you have active transportation components. So if you're following through on an adopted active transportation plan, check, which we do have, you're putting in class 4 separated bike lanes. You're also doing traffic calming, and you're adding improved crossings. That is what we need to lead with if we're looking for federal or state, transportation funds to make this happen. And we need to be able to sell that, the one way is more ancillary to what we're trying to accomplish with active transportation. And, it's going to be a crapshoot, but the only way to really chase this is, pressing hard on active transportation.
So one last thing, Tom. So you are saying that there are studies of one-way couplet success or non-success with respect to business improvements? You've actually seen those?
I've seen studies on
Okay.
greenway benefits.
Okay.
I have not regarding couplets. There's most likely something out there. I need to do the research. But more immediately, I wanted to talk to public works directors in other communities, starting close. Ashland, Phoenix, Medford, they all have one-way couplets. And just get some feedback on how well is it working? Was it worth it? Just so that we're learning from others.
Right, because we do have examples close by.
Right.
Yeah. So do report back on that. I guess I'll be seeing you at these ad hoc committee meetings.
Yes.
Thank you very much for all the work you've done so far. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to public comments. Public comment, we'll start with those in the audience here at the auditorium. Anybody like to come up and speak on items not contained in the agenda after this? State your name and the city you live in.
Hi, I'm Ken Brummel-Smith. I'm on the board for the Recreation and Parks District and president of the Rotary. I just wanted to mention that Tom's proposal regarding the Greenway is part of the master plan. It was conceived as
The master plan for the rec district.
the rec district master plan, yes, and was conceived as a collaboration between the city and the rec district. And speaking as president of the Rotary, I think it'd be a great thing for us to be involved in as our club. I can't say that as a commitment yet because obviously I have to bring that up to the board, but the Rotary has always been very much in support of parks. And so I think that this would just be another thing that we could support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the audience here at the hall? Apparently not. We'll move on to Zoom. And we have no public commentators on Zoom either. So we'll close public comment at this point and move on to item number 5, council and staff comments. We always start off with the city manager, so go ahead, Todd.
Sure. I wanted to give you an update on the negotiations with One Shasta LLC. If you recall, the owners of that property are willing to cede the tank site as well as easements to us. That's not an issue. They're also willing to provide the water the city needs, but there's a hang-up in that they also want to reserve the right to hold on to the water that would serve their own site, which poses a lot of issues. Do they want to become their own utility provider and have folks on call to, address, say, a cryptosporidium outbreak or a coliform hit? And that's a lot to take on. And the owner has been pretty easy to work with. I think, though, he is conflating water rights with well rights, and they're different things. So to try to get through this impasse, there is a water rights firm out of San Francisco called Somac, Simmons & Dunn. It was a little bit of a work to get through to somebody over there. I filled out their application of, that includes our attorney and his attorney. They're running a conflict of interest to make sure that there's nobody on staff has any dealings with these firms. And I'm going to have a retainer agreement tomorrow, and then I hope to, once that retainer agreement for 5 to 10 hours of work, we can get the owner, myself, and Somac on a call and try to work out and explain what the owner actually has, and if there is a way forward to accommodate the owner for what he wants to have, and we get what the city needs, we can then, formulate the bones of an agreement and then have our own attorneys complete it, so we're not paying an outside firm outsized amount of money. Switching gears, we've been talking about the potential for daylighting Castle Creek, and there is the Beers owned or was leasing an area where they were doing car repairs in the back. It's an area that if we were to daylight Castle Creek, it becomes an eyesore. If we were to create this great amenity, we have, as of mid last week, we have a lease agreement that we put before Steve Beers and the owner of the property, Alan Brownell, to take over the lease payments for 6 months while we do due diligence. And what we've heard from the owner of the property is, what's in it for me? And, my explanation is that, well, you're going to continue to receive, the lease payments that, you're doing your longtime tenant a favor by allowing us to pick up that 6 months of rent while we do environmental. And he doesn't see the value in that, and he's looking for us to sign a letter of intent that we plan to purchase the property, and we can't do that. I have no idea, what kind of environmental things we're going to find, especially under that structure itself. And I don't know, based on the environmental issues that we find there, and we conduct, valuation of that property, will that valuation take into account the amount of money we need to take in to clean up? So right now we're at an impasse with that owner, and there is an assignment clause in Steve Beer's lease, but it says he needs owner's approval for it. But if you're talking about a low-risk tenant and assuming a lease for you, I can't imagine a more sure bet than a city. So we're trying to work that issue out. If that doesn't work, the one thing the owner is amenable to is leasing to purchase the 2 unpaved parcels, which will provide some parking, but the beauty of that is, even if we find environmental issues, we still need to look at it to ensure that there's nothing leaching from those properties onto other properties that we need to clean up. But if it really is, minor spills from vehicles being parked there, and it's been used for parking, and then the city takes it over for the exact same use, we don't need to go through CEQA. So that may be an option, and I'm trying to walk that fine line between not taking sides in this party dispute, but needing to resolve this quickly before the February 1st lease, payment is due for Mr. Beers.
Chair?
City Manager, has the owner expressed any number, as in, this is how much I want for it, what he wants to sell it for?
No, he knows that he needs evaluation, and his concern is that when he's made calls, and I found this in the past too, in doing evaluation down in Dunsmuir, that calling Medford all the way to Sacramento, the lead time to get somebody that has the commercial appraisal license that a grant maker requires, there's a year lag time. But there is the firm that I use down in Dunsmuir, Ryan Valuations, who the principal has retired and he's up here, and Tom spoke to him and he says, I'm sorry this will take so long, but I can't start the appraisal for the next 2 months. So we can get on this a lot quicker than we thought. And I let the owner know this, so that's something we can get evaluation on fairly quickly. It's just, what's the environmental show, and how does the valuation take into account what we need to clean up, if we did? My feeling is from anecdotal evidence and from what people have said about the actual structure, that the structure may not be in our best interest. But if we're able to at least grab the parking out back, we can police that and not have the eyesore that it has been in the line of sight of an amenity that we're building in terms of daylighting Castle. So we'll see where this shakes out. It's got to shake out this week. So switching gears, had a call with Joe Dieguez at Cosmont today, and we went through all of the pieces that we need for our first Public Finance Authority meeting for Mount Shasta only EIFT. What I need to do, and Kathy, maybe you can help me, is to reach out to the PFA and find out times that they're available to meet, hopefully at least a handful, and then I can ensure that Joe can join us via Zoom on that meeting. There are several portions to it, but the first meeting is pretty low stress. It's a tax increment finance 101, and outlining the duties of the board, and then there's some paperwork that we need to bring back to council. So I want to get that going as quickly as we can. And so with the library, as you all know, the Friends of the Library have been operating independently until they figure out what they're going to do in terms of hiring a business manager / library manager. They actually have somebody that's on staff that's studying library science, and when that person's education is done, they need to determine, A, does that person want to continue here as opposed to going somewhere else? But they feel like, and also to allow her to have some time to be seasoned. So in the meantime, they want a formalized independent contractor contract that allows them to operate the library on their own. I have that contract. I've met with them. They've got comments, and I've got answers to most of their comments, and I'll get them back to them tomorrow, and we're pretty close to signing that. So it's in process. And I don't know if there's other stuff. I don't want to take up too much time, but those are the big things.
Chief? Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to give you a couple updates. First, from our task force officer, update from the last couple of months. I missed that. Since November, he's seized 2,722 marijuana plants, nearly 3,700 pounds of processed marijuana, pound and a half of fentanyl powder has been seized. Nearly $58,000 in cash has been seized, and 13 firearms. So we're getting some good production out of our task force officer. And then here in the last 2 months, we've had two of our larger cases that have had a lot of public knowledge come to conclusions. If you remember, we had David Knowles, who was charged with sexually battering his customers at the Mountain Inn Lodge and Retreat. He pled guilty to 14 counts of sexual battery and is now headed to prison. And then Arthur Boyd, who was the Wairika city clerk, he just pled guilty to rape by force or fear and possession of child pornography over 600, and he is sentenced to 8 years in prison as well. So two big cases to come into a conclusion for the victims and stuff, and I want council to know about them.
Thank you, Chief. Ken, Public Works, any comments tonight? No?
No comments.
Okay, thanks. Ariel, do you want to say anything at this point? You know, you're going to have a big item later. Yeah. Okay, council members, would you like to chime in on anything? Start with
Jeff? John? All right. My only concern is, what are we going to do about this erosion problem from the creek that appears north of the railroad tracks? I think it originates somewhere behind is it the Highland? It's called it originates in Cascade Gulch. It's been redirected around the Highland, what is that housing development? Upton Heights. I actually looked into this a lot because the silt is substantial at Rockfellow and Everett Memorial. The two entrances into the Mount Shasta High School parking lot for the football field you can't use them anymore. Yeah, so this is a drainage problem like that.
It's a big drainage problem. So Upton Highlands HOA, the last word I had is they're suing the county and the engineering firm.
They're suing?
The county and the engineering firm. Let Ken speak about any FEMA or OES dollars that are coming our way to help mitigate this, but it's just going to get worse.
I guess I do have comments. Is it on now? Okay, so there's two issues there with the Upton Highlands. The first is the mud flow, the most recent one in August, which was not the only one, but it's the most recent one. And then the second problem is the stormwater detention system. The mud flow was a big enough problem, obviously a huge cleanup. We have filed a claim. That is an emergency event, state of emergency declared by the state of California. California OES has recognized it, FEMA has recognized it. We've put in a claim for all our cleanup in the tune of about $113,000. And it looks like we have a very good chance of getting paid back for that. And that's for the initial cleanup, flushing out all the stormwater drainage system, actually creating a couple of new manholes because we couldn't access all the drainage system without creating some new manholes. So that's good. That only covers the initial event, the first few days in August. We've had several mud flows since then, and what's causing that is it's remnant damage from the mud flow. If you look at the design of that subdivision, instead of one, as you probably know, new developments have to mitigate the increase in stormwater runoff from all the paving, all the roofs, driveways, everything else. That subdivision, instead of building one big detention pond, which is what most developments do, they had a unique approach where they took the existing ditch system and built hundreds of mini detention ponds in that ditch system. It's the first time I've ever seen it done, and it seemed to have worked up until the point of the mud flow, which wiped it all out. It has not been reconstructed, so every time we get a significant rain since then, it just flushes right through that subdivision, bringing all that debris down into town. I've had several conversations with County Public Works. Most recently, I've talked to Rick Dean, the Community Services Director for the county, and hopefully we're going to make some headway with discussions with the HOA and getting them to correct their stormwater detention system. That's kind of where it stands right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a concern over the mud flows coming through on Saturday when all that was flowing down the street and coming down Lake Street and being really bad. I looked and it was being diverted with an open lot into Sisson Meadow. It was coming down Lake Street and then turning right into an empty lot, like it had been diverted that way to help disperse into Sisson Meadow. The reason I bring that up is my bar right next door to Pepsi, all of that overflow comes through, and I've got a lot of mud from that by the city drain, by the sidewalk, a substantial amount of mud that way. I don't know if anything from all that overflow that I'm part of has been affected by the new mud coming in there. I don't know if that's something you guys could look at, because the pond dumps into the alleyway.
Yeah.
That dumps out later, then the overflow dumps out 3 different tubes, 2 under my property and 1 on Pepsi, into the same city spot, into the city drain.
I'll definitely take a look
The
at
one
that.
above ground has got a lot of mud. I'm concerned for the mud levels of the 2 pipes underground underneath my property.
And that, I'll take a look at that specific spot.
There's a lot of mud
You've
came
seen
through
where
there
we've
Saturday.
sandbagged all the storm drain entrances.
Yeah, I saw that, because
Okay, the idea is to keep all the material on the street. It spreads it a lot further. On the other hand, it's something like, if you notice, we've been in there and we've cleaned everything up in a day and a half.
No, I'm just talking about just if there's any
That I will address, because we don't want
mud
it,
buildup that could just,
we don't want it getting into the pipes.
okay.
And that's why we've been sandbagging everything, all the standard entrances, but I'll take a look at that
Yeah,
one.
come-
We
come
may
by
have,
that city drain right there between Pepsi and.
yeah, we may have
my
missed
place.
one that we
Got a
need
lot
to
of mud,
sandbag.
and let alone the 2 pipes underneath the ground that still empty into that same drain.
Yeah.
Just don't know what the mud levels might be. in
Yeah,
those
we will
drains.
definitely look at that, because the whole idea is we don't want to plug up the pipes again. So it sounds like we might have missed one.
Okay. Just giving you a heads up in case there's future problems again.
All right, so to sum up, the problem originates with Upton Heights. Until they solve their detention pond misdesign or redesign it and rebuild it, we're going to have to improvise, mainly keeping the mud out of our storm drains, because that's a bigger problem than just cleaning up silt on the roads, right? And-
Correct.
And that
Now-
seems like a
We are going to track the
good approach
costs.
for now.
Like I said, we're most likely going to be reimbursed for that big event in
From the
August.
summer, yeah.
The following events, FEMA won't cover, but we are tracking the bills, and talking to Todd, we may pursue restitution if it's feasible.
Okay, so there's a cause and liabilities, I got it. yeah.
And we don't want to go this direction, but given that this is a multi-million-dollar solution, and from all involved, the engineering firm came up with a faulty design, and the Board of Supervisors approved it, you know, and there is a potential that we may want to chase a lawsuit against the county as well as the engineer of record, especially if they're still in business and they have E&O insurance, because if there's an error and an omission, this is it.
All right, well, keep us updated on this whole process. In the meantime, we'll drive a lot slower in that area when it's muddy, which is what I was doing this weekend. All right, we'll move on to committee updates, if you have any, Todd.
None.
Very good. Let's move on to item number 7, consent agenda. The city manager recommends approval of the following consent agenda items. All resolutions and ordinances on this agenda or added hereto shall be introduced or adopted as applicable by title only, and the full reading thereof is hereby waived. A, approval of minutes, December 11th, 2023 regular meeting. B, approval of disbursements, accounts payable January 3rd and January 16th, 2024. Total gross payroll and taxes for period ending January 7th, 2024. C, monthly investment report. D, second reading and adoption of ordinance CCO-24-02 regarding city council compensation.
I only have, am I allowed to even vote on D since I was not here for the first reading or the recommendation?
Yeah.
So is that going to have to get continued to a next meeting since it's only these 2 voting on it?
You can vote on it. My concern would be more Councilmember Collins, as he voted against it at the last meeting. So if it's going to be contentious, I would recommend continuing it to the next meeting when you'll have a full council.
That would be D.
Correct.
So I will move that agenda item 7D be continued to the next city council meeting
which is February 12th. That being said, can I get a motion on A through C?
Motion to approve consent agenda items A through C.
Second.
And that's by title only, John?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes.
Thank you, sir. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the consent agenda A through C passes, and we continue D to the next meeting. All right, now let's move on to agenda item number 8, the Siskiyou Economic Development Council Memorandum of Understanding. For background on this, we are going to Todd, and then we're going to have a speaker. So Todd, you want to introduce the speaker?
Yes. So the MOU with Siskiyou Economic Development Corporation ends in June of this year, and so we have a brand new MOU that's in front of us. Our annual, payment to SEDC has been $30,000 a year. It's increased to $36,000. What I would like to add is that, I wholeheartedly, from a staff perspective, support this. They've been instrumental in the cleanup of the landing, finding the grant for this, finding the grants for pulling Cosmon on all the EIFD work. We work closely on other grant proposals, and we have implemented regional meetings with other city managers along the I-5 corridor, and we're in discussions about chasing a grant for planning infrastructure for the landing as part of trying to get that off the ground. And they've been extremely helpful, readily available, and their staff is really knowledgeable across the board. They've got some great people. Anyway.
Thank you very much. Tanya Dowse with Siskiyou Economic Development Council. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for this time to present the proposed renewal of our MOU, and thank you to Mr. Uhas for the opening comments. I don't want to take a lot of time talking about our work because we were just here, and I think you're all pretty familiar with it. I will tell you that the MOU originated because working with our city jurisdictions, none of our jurisdictions none of our jurisdictions were able to, really fund professional economic development capacity individually. So the strategy to combine our efforts in order to provide professional economic development capacity was originally, I think a really good cost-saving strategy for our jurisdictions. I also want to say, because I know this is really high on your mind right now, that we take very seriously the investment that you make in us, in our work, and we believe wholeheartedly it's our job to help you build a tax base. And, we focus on creating a climate for and inspiring investment in our private sector and businesses, and in addition to that, in public sector, so that we can create a community that provides a prosperous economy and promotes tourism and workforce and business development. I'll share just a couple really quick things with you that you might not be fully aware of. I know we talk about Discover Siskiyou and our Small Business Development Center when we're here in front of you a lot, because they're really good metrics and measures of the work we do. We also have recently been designated as a state business innovation hub. And this is a new designation. We're really the only rural designation in California, and that work is going to show up here in the near term as we develop strategies for business acceleration. We have been designated a state climate collaborative, and again, we kind of are a little bit trailblazing in these state investments. This climate collaborative, we're the only one led by an economic development team. And what I think is really noteworthy about this is it gives us the opportunity to look at and plan for climate impacts through the lens of economic development. It also, I think, just as importantly, if not more importantly, I don't know if I'd say more important, just as importantly, opens the door to public investment. And I think Mount Shasta set's really well poised for that type of public investment. And we're going to see that's where our state's going to continue to make investments in the, in the next decade. I know Todd did such a good job of queuing this up. Obviously we continue to pursue redevelopment support for you and through the brownfields work and through the EIFD study. We don't often name businesses by name because most of the businesses we work with don't want us to. But I will share with you tonight that the Summit Lofts and Theory Coffee were two clients that we worked from the very beginning with and intently with to help them locate here in Mount Shasta. And I know that they're okay with me saying that out loud. We have, for the last year and a half, been really intently working on developing a relationship with a regional developing firm, and they are, I understand now, in really good communication with the city manager, and that's looking very positive. On the horizon, Todd's kind of laid down the gauntlet for us, that he wants Mount Shasta more centered in the bullseye of our work, bigger investments, more of what we do. I think that you're going to see us, this emerging collaboration between the cities on our I-5 corridor, prominently leading our next 5 years and probably 10 years, to be truthful. And we're still really actively pursuing the pipeline of federal investment. So I think you're going to see opportunities in clean energy and probably transportation as those two continue to, there's still funding available in that pipeline. Obviously, I'm here to answer any questions that you have, and I really hope that you're able to support the renewal of our work with you.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah. That would be next. This is council clarification questions. Yeah. You're fine? Okay. John? Yeah, I'm clear too, so I'm good that way. Then we're going to move to public comment. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, so MOU for the SEDC. Anyone in the audience would like to comment on this item? Okay, looks like no one. Anyone in the Zoom audience? All right, let's bring this back to council to discuss. Jeffrey, you had something to say. Okay. Being disciplined.
Tanya, over the years, it's taken me a while to understand how a background position can be as impactful as it is relative to development in our town, which brings in revenue. And for me, that's the bottom line. An investment in you and your organization is an investment to increase the possibility of bringing more revenue to this town, which we need. Thank you. I'm clear. I just wanted to say it's taken me a while, but I really get all the stuff that you all do to support us.
No comments, John? All right. Well, I'm a proponent of the Siskiyou Economic Development Council and have been since I started serving on the City Council back in 2016. I think that they do important and valuable work in many different areas, and I think we should support this MOU. So with that being said, this particular item doesn't have a clear way. It's not a resolution, but would somebody make a motion to approve the MOU? Since there seems to be, not really.
Let's take a shot at it. All right.
Yep.
Motion to approve.
Go with the outline.
No worries. Motion to approve the MOU between the SEDC and the city of Mount Shasta for July of 2024 through June 30th of 2029. Title only.
Second?
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes regarding the MOU with SEDC. Thank you very much. And we move on to item number 10. Now, this one could be a little bit, 9, could be a little longer. I'm going to say we take a 3-minute break. I'm assuming you're going to have some questions and so forth. So 3-minute bathroom break, if you don't mind. We'll be back at 6:43-ish, okay? Okay, it's time to start back up. John?
Where did, well, Todd's in the bathroom. John is coming back. All right. Jean Niels or Nels?
Nels.
Nels. All right. We're going to give Jean a minute to say something about greenways. I apparently missed her hand raised.
I'm the executive director of our museum, which last year we got over 14,000 visitors, and we're recovering after the pandemic. Thank you for your support through the years. And you guys, yes. Oh, I have to be closer? Oh, okay. Thank you for your support through the years. And with many of the visitors that come in, they say, isn't there anything to do downtown? And I said, well, yeah, you can go to the park, you can go this. They said, but right downtown, isn't there any place where you can just walk around and enjoy the beauty of the area? And I tell them to go to the place where you can see the mountain without obstruction. But I think a greenway is something that they're looking for. They want to do something with their family, visit the local businesses, and also have a nice place to see the beauty of the area. And I think that would really enhance what they're hoping to see in the area. And I could even put out a little, survey to our visitors, because I often ask what's the reason they come to the museum and to the town. And the beauty of the area and the things to do here, the recreation, I mean, that's a huge draw. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Appreciate that. All right. So back to item number 9, mid-year budget review for 2023-24. And Muriel Terrell, the finance director, will have the floor to introduce this and go over it in detail.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. So here we are once again, 23-24 mid-year budget revisions. We do this every year, and this year's no different. We have quite a few changes. I'll start with the general fund. We will have a change here. After we had published all of this stuff, I found out that the Fire 50/50 grant from CAL FIRE is actually something that should be recognized in the Fire Equipment Fund. So there will be $12,250 less income into the general fund and $24,500 less expense in the fire department in the general fund. So I wanted to make that note. I've already changed it in in our accounting records. One thing I wanted to note too was that we did have some police and fire personnel reimbursements for off-district fires that they attended earlier or actually in the late summer of this fiscal year. So that actually is a bonus to actually reduce overtime or recognize the increase in overtime in the fire and the police departments. We are also renting some property at the Roseburg property, and we're receiving rental income from that. As Ken spoke to before, we will be receiving personnel and equipment reimbursement in the amount of $113,410 for the FEMA OES declared mud flow thing that happened in August of this last year. So the total increase to the general fund income is $178,504. As for expenses throughout, I want to just highlight some of the larger areas. Of course, I just spoke to the police and fire overtime, which is somewhat mitigated from the reimbursement from off-district fires. We last winter had our emergency generator go out for City Hall and the police department. We realized then that the generator was going to have to be upgraded and or replaced, which it was a big hit to the general fund in this year of $38,000. There are some other small things going on throughout. the general fund, and of course, insurance and liability, workers' compensation, that's one of them as well, 34,500 increase there. As we develop the budgets, which I'm going to be doing in the next couple of months, we find out later that the actual amounts of property, liability, workers' compensation insurance increases. So it almost always takes a hit at mid-year, even though I'm given some information about what increases there are going to be. They tend to be off a little bit. So that's that there. All in all, there is a change of $45,254 loss in the general fund, bringing the projected loss down to, or up to $520,130, and we still have a contingency of about 26% for the general fund. Would you like to ask questions now, or do you want to go back and forth, or how do you want to do this?
So are you going, will you continue on to the enterprise zone accounts, funds?
It depends on how you want to approach it.
Okay, so Mr. Collins is going to have the most detailed questions. Did you want to approach the general fund right now or come back to it later?
I'm going to just go ahead and go through it.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on, another thing that happened in this fiscal year is that we needed to replace our skid steer, which removes snow from sidewalks in the city, and that was a hit of about $57,000 to the equipment fund. Moving on to enterprise and special revenue funds, because we now have a public works director, we are going to start doing some work in the transportation fund, local transportation fund, STIP, gas tax funds. Before the end of this fiscal year, we plan on spending about $250,000 out of those funds that we have been saving over the years to now do the preparation for streets for chip sealing and pavement upgrades. So knowing that the actual construction and maintenance will occur in fiscal year 24-25, it's an opportunity to then get that work done before summer to be ready to go. In the enterprise funds, drainage fund, as you know, we're developing citywide drainage system updates, and a Proposition 218 process is ongoing. And if that process results in a pass, the study shows that we would receive $62,925 in revenue for the month of June. Moving forward, solid waste funds, we continue to build resources for the funding of future state mandates. Water fund, there's some increases for professional services for analysis of a pressure reducing valve for Rockfellow, and an increase of $3,700 in materials and supplies for steel plates to cover open trenches. In the water improvement fund, there are two projects that have been completed or nearing completion. They are the CDBG Pine Street project and the IRWM Oak Street waterline replacement project. The only project ongoing in water improvement is the Spring Hill Water Supply project, where we're as Todd had mentioned, we're trying to source a new well. Wastewater department, we're asking for an additional $25,000 in professional services for manhole design replacement, and in capital outlay of $15,000, an amount needed to construct a new line in the Oak Street alleyway. In the wastewater plant, an additional $10,000 for overtime, and $264,116 for interim interest charged for the wastewater treatment plant, which is why it's a huge amount. It's accruing at about a little over $1,600 a day. So as soon as that wastewater treatment plant is finished and complete, then we would shift funding from CoBank, which is charging us interest, to the much lower interest from USDA. And remember, the USDA would not actually do the loan until the project was complete. And the result of that is some major amounts of interest expense hitting the wastewater treatment plant. For CDBG, most of the programs we've had there actually finished last year. We do have for this year senior snow removal, which has started this year. There's going to be a new notice of funding availability expected in the summer. For the COPS program, we always receive a growth allocation. I didn't actually find out about it until I was off a little bit there. But the allocation is $65,271, and we have, of course, increases in expenditures for capital outlay and equipment that will take care of that growth allocation. In the special projects that we're administrating through the Integrated Regional Water Management funding, we have 4 projects there. Our Oak Street Waterline project. We also have the Trout Unlimited project, McLeod's project, and Dunsmuir's project. So we're actually managing those projects, which are actually just now starting to have expenses for those 3, the McLeod, Dunsmuir, and Trout. In the brownfield, the new mill cleanup has been completed. The new funding called the Brownfield Southern Dump has begun with surveying to happen once the weather improves. And this survey will delineate the areas with deed restrictions for the type of use appropriate in those particular areas. In the Business Improvement Fund, previously approved expenses of $10,000 are budgeted for projects that were determined by the committee. Additionally, the rental of the Chestnut property was added at $13,500. So environmental research can be done for the potential parking lot on Chestnut. This is recognized here in the Business Improvement Fund as that property is located within the business district and would be appropriate if a parking lot is the result of what's happening there. Again, FEMA has been reinstated to recognize the city's work on the mud flow issues on Everett Memorial, and transfers out of that fund into the general fund to recognize reimbursement for the work done in the general fund will occur through that. Questions?
Thanks, Muriel. It's real helpful to get these mid-year budget reviews. You know, and I think as a headline, one of the I'm going to get to a question here in a second. And I guess that we can just kind of go right there. I just have a few quick ones. The $520,000 roughly that you're projecting as a loss for this year brings us to roughly a 26% contingency fund, which would be roughly $1.6 million. And that when we started the beginning of last year, the contingency fund was up to $2.6 million. Last year's loss took it down to about 2.1, and this year's loss is going to take it down to about 1.6. Are those headlines correct, roughly?
You hit the highlights.
Okay. And this is kind of both for Ken and you, though. roughly $113,000 that's for the FEMA reimbursement for the first spill, that money coming into the general fund, do you have any just top-line sense of what percentage of expenses were variable, i.e. overtime, things that you had to go out of your normal arena to go get, as versus you account to FEMA people who are already on your payroll, but had to do this, all these activities when that initial flow. And I'm trying to kind of come up with a net number, and it may be 100%, I don't know, but when you bill them 113, how much of that is incremental expenses, meaning I've got to charge for employees overtime, or I've got to go buy I've got to rent some new pieces of equipment to deal with this, or versus stuff that's, that's already in our budget for your salaries and gear.
It actually did covered everything. We're putting in their standard time, we're putting in their overtime, we're putting in our own equipment use, we're putting in the rental equipment use. It covers emergency services to a certain extent where the police had to come out and, put up barricades and stop traffic.
Right.
So 100% for that week.
Where I'm going with this is that might have become a good thing that we had this spill, because it kind of net brought us in an extra, I don't know, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 that we weren't otherwise going to get. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Actually, what it means is, and the way you have to approach this is, until you know it's a disaster or a declared disaster, you have to recognize the expenses where you would have recognized them any other time, streets and roads in this case.
Right.
So our employees documented their time on their time cards as when they were there doing whatever it is. We have all of that backup, all of their time cards that will be directly charged to FEMA, so it's an offset to the Streets and Roads Department, essentially. Right. Rental of equipment, we're using standardized rates for rental of equipment. It's our equipment, so that's going to come into the general fund as well to handle the maintenance and repairs or any of those sorts of things. So the bottom line is $113,000 is going into the general fund for this disaster.
Clarifying questions, John?
Just a quick question, just over the $222,758 over expenditure. I see that, obviously a new Bobcat, the skid steer, 57,000 plus. A lot of this stuff just kind of just unique to this year. It's not going to be a continued expenditures that way. Stuff to worry about, like, oh, we got to.
Well, the generator, that was something that had to be done, and we. Yeah, it was from.
Yeah, so in between that, so we got 100,007 right there, 117,000 right there.
Yep.
Just on two items.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's
really
a skid
isn't
steer.
something to be too concerned about, in my opinion.
Well, I'm the person that we still need to be concerned. It's still we're still we're going the wrong way. We've got it, as Councilmember Collings has said, that we have to find revenue sources. So I'm looking for in a lot of different directions. One of which is 0.25% sales tax. That's about between $375,000 and $400,000. Bottom line, our business licenses have not been increased since 1983. So the fees for business licenses, so we're going to be looking at reworking that, coming up, perhaps developing a committee to look at what other places do. We've already done quite a bit of this research, but to bring in other people from the community and from council to take that into consideration. One of the other things that I need to bring the finance committee into just moving forward is I've just taken not a class, but I sat through a program about pension liability assessments and the need for a long-term plan to reduce our unfunded pension liability, which is doing nothing but going up over time. It's the CalPERS system in the state of California. The little city of Mount Shasta isn't the only one having problems with this, and there are firms that are developing programs to mitigate the large amounts of unfunded liability there's some smoothing techniques that can happen over time. There's the unfunded liability is basically a liability that is at about 6.8%. So you're looking at different types of ways to strategically look at doing debt at a much lower rate and basically paying down the liability and thereby capturing the savings between the new rate, which would be lower than the 6.8%. That's just some of the things. So looking at that to try to get some long-term savings in the pension liability area. But yeah, we're just trying to explore everything that we can. I will reach out to Council Member Klur to see when she has availability to meet with, as she's on the Finance Committee, and John to take a look at this pension liability thing and try to come up to speed with that and get this consultant on board to educate us and get a plan in place to move forward in taking care of this pension liability.
What kind of savings in that, potentially?
It's significant. It can be in the millions of dollars.
Oh, wow.
When you're talking about our pension liability long term is between 11 and 12 million dollars. If you have a savings between, say, a 6.2 and being able to finance something at a 3.5%, it can be significant.
Okay, just some quick questions about these funds. Economic Enhancement Fund, that's not related to DEAC, right?
That is, the Business Improvement District is DEAC, which is where the parking stuff is now being recognized.
So what exactly is the Economic Enhancement Fund?
That is a fund that recognizes brownfield.
Okay.
It's a fund that recognizes the IRWIM projects, basically special projects.
Okay.
Okay.
One more thing. This is about the Beautification Committee's project fund. Have you scheduled the purchase of one of their big projects was to replace all the garbage cans?
Yes.
And is that included in here?
That's included in there.
Okay, because they don't have much money left after that's all.
Well, what happens in that the CDBG area where when we have monies that are no longer federalized, so the loan money that we receive is under $35,000. It goes into the other fund, and we use that for things like transfers into the Beautification Committee for those kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have any more questions. It sounds like, well, I'll talk about that afterwards. Public comments. So, here in the audience, we have one person with their hand up. Come on up. State your name and what city you live in, please.
My name is Patricia Krogan, and I live in Mount Shasta. And I just wanted to address maybe a special project or additional income streams for the city, as you were discussing. You guys have this unique problem here, right, of all these people coming from all over the world thinking they're going to get an apartment while they're visiting the mountain, and then there's nothing here. And so it's come to me a couple times that hostels would work very well here, especially if they were city managed, maybe one at the north end of the town, the south end of the town. But they could be, again, short-term housing, maybe even, $15 a night, but it would be a constant income, plus if you had a cafeteria. But it would resolve the problem of all these people arriving and not having anywhere to stay. So if it was managed by the city, made no drugs and just keeping it really clean, I just think that it would be a great source of revenue, and you would solve the problem. Even, homeless people might be able to stay there sometimes. So, and then the other thing I wanted to ask is if you guys could fix the potholes. There's some major potholes right now that are getting 3-4 feet across. A tire can go in there, or there could be an accident. So that's all I had to say. So I hope you'll think about the hostel idea.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we have one other person in the audience. No? Okay. And from the Zoom land? Nothing. All right. So we will bring this back to council for further commentary and discussion. Any thoughts, Jeffrey?
I think one of the things that bears reminding is we have a good bit of money that moves through our town. Our general fund is relatively large. We still have a sizable contingency fund. And that said, we're headed in the wrong direction. We passed a year ago some very large salary increases. All of us got into that knowing we were going to lose in the neighborhood of $1 million. It was going to be 400 in year one, 300 in year two, 200 in year three, 100 in year four, and then we would break even relative to rising incomes. And I'm not sure where we have gotten off track on that, but in 5 months at the end of this year, it appears we will have already spent our $1 million, and we are nowhere near having a break-even budget. Which, in a nutshell, why I'm kind of keeping this short and sweet and top line is my suggestion is that we call for next year's budget within 60 days, and that we do so allowing the expertise that's in this room and outside of the room to come back to us and say, look, we're not micromanagers. You all live day in and day out with all the realities that the nuances of which we certainly don't understand. But I do understand the top line, which is kind of the bottom line, which is where we cannot be losing $500,000 a year. That's a relatively short train ride till it crashes. And so my request, and subject to input from the rest of the council, is in 60 days or less, come back to us for the budget for next year that shows it balanced, which will take into account that for half of the year there'll be half of $240,000 from the incremental hotel tax that was passed. That will be in effect for half of the year.
That'll be in effect for the whole year. You're talking about next year's budget you want, Pat?
First. Okay, so it isn't December 1st. It's not, it's July 1. Okay, great. Even better news. Then we'll have that 240 coming in, but so again, the headline, come back with a balanced budget, made better by an additional 240 coming in, starting on July 1st, but with some analysis that says, help us understand. How did we go from things are looking great to all of a sudden it just seems to me this can't all be salaries.
that something else is fundamentally, like, as in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, something else is going on where money is being spent more than we're bringing it in, and some analysis that says, hey, look, that here's where the problems were, headline revenue versus expenses, and how we'll adjust that to come back and next year have a balanced budget. So this $1.6 million that we have in our contingency fund, if we're going to write checks on that, we write it on something that is more legacy oriented, meaning like a park that's going to be in our downtown, or I'm not trying to make suggestions of what those things might be, but that we take this once in a lifetime $2.6 million, and our first big chunk out of it was $1 million to bring salaries up before we actually had that money, and we're taking it out of our reserves, and that will be gone in 5 months. That will be over in 5 months, and so it's a request to the rest of the council going, do we just want to make some hard choices, or allow our excellent department heads to make some hard choices? And maybe they're not hard, maybe they become clear. I don't know. That's because I'm not the guy that's gonna, that he has to make those choices. You all have to make them, not us. But I can't see how we can suffer even remotely. If you take 500 minus the 240 that's coming in, another $280,000 in losses, I just don't think we can do that. We can't continue down this same path. Something's got to change. And that's I'll see how the rest of the councilors feel, but I'm making a request for a balanced budget.
And
no, I'm definitely in the same boat with you, Jeffrey. I mean, if we're going the wrong way, let's take a look at it now. I've got no problem with that. But I don't know what to cut until we actually have more, till we talked about it. Is 60 days feasible also? Is that for something new that way, to looking at something, 4 months earlier than normal? Is that feasible?
That's you, Muriel. Do you think you can come up with a balanced budget by the end of
We're
March?
talking basically, the end of March.
I can tell you right now, if you want to balance this budget, do a 1/4 cent sales tax increase, and it's taken care of.
Okay.
There, I said it.
Okay. All right. So, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I'll just state that what I think the problem is that, and it's pretty clear, we did have growth in revenues, but it was outpaced by expenses, which is mostly related to payroll, and apparently pension, which I consider part of the payroll expense. So going forward, and I thought we were obligated to come to the table, meaning when we vote on a budget, it was by law supposed to be balanced. I was under the impression that at this level, we had to at least hypothetically be voting on a balanced budget versus, I thought there was some obligation there. That's why I've always been kind of unsure of what we were doing when we knowingly were spending that much money. But I went along with it. Yeah, it's time to take a good hard look at what it's going to take to bring the expenses and the revenues to par. So we have a TOT tax increase that passed in a very lopsided way in favor of that tax increase. You could go back to that well if you wanted to. That's on visitors, and I hate to say this, but the average visitor is not paying attention, looking at the overall price of a room versus the components of the price of the room. They're not generally breaking that down. Could go that route. The other route is, as Muriel suggested, put a sales tax in at a 1/4%. That would be a 50% plus 1 vote, because it's a general tax.
Is that something that could be on the November ballot in time?
Yeah. Yeah, so we'd have to have that set up to be on the ballot by July 1st, but the taxes in that case would start on January 1st, Muriel? What do you think? Yeah, so that would be a half year at best, but it would help, and it would certainly help later. So we know that a quarter-cent sales tax leads to about $300,000 plus in revenue, and that's because we have the library quarter-cent sales tax, which is bringing in over $300,000, correct?
It's closer to 4.
That plus the TOT, right there, those two things solve, on the surface, solve the gap, the deficit gap, right there, even without going to cutting expenses. Muriel suggested that we look at finding ways, interesting ways of refinancing. Is there a better term to use for the pension costs?
Well, the pension costs are going up and up and up and up. And these strategies are a way to smooth costs. So you would, one, know what your payment is every year.
So wouldn't you basically take a loan out to pay that in advance and then make the payments a set amount?
That's one of the strategies. There are other strategies. You can actually work with CalPERS has some different things. There's a lot of different things, and in combination, the message here is that we need to develop a plan, a pension liability assessment plan that says, if we can do these particular things, we can then smooth the liability out over the year. We're going to know from year to year what the liability is going to be each year, whereas you're not having $150,000 hit to the general fund to fund this unfunded pension liability. So it's a way to, there are some strategies, which is why I want to bring the Finance Committee in to discuss these things and actually have these folks that specialize in this lead us through what an appropriate plan would look like.
Okay, so that is the main area of expense reduction or control that we can hopefully manage. Outside of that, we're locked into payroll increases related to CBA's collective bargaining agreements, and we have contracts with employees, management employees, and so forth. So I don't really see a lot of change in that. I think it would be really disruptive to start approaching pay cuts and that type of thing. If that's what you're hinting at, yeah, go ahead.
The budget is large. It has projects, it has equipment, it has personnel, it has many components. I'm pretty good with numbers. I don't understand how all of a sudden we're losing $500,000 a year in a trend of 2 years in a row when we used to live here and we didn't. We would have roughly a break even or a slightly positive addition to the contingency fund, i.e. we broke even or made a little money. For me, to be clear, to approach the people of this town and ask them all and anybody who shows up here we need to squeeze your pockets a little more to increase sales tax is an abysmal failure on all of our parts, that we can't figure out how to run this town and do so on a balanced budget. That's just a failure. The fact that we've raised the hotel tax 2%, wasn't my favorite idea, just speaking for myself, but it's paid for by people who visit our town, and it's relatively in line with when you go elsewhere. There's nothing that's that far out of line. And we got support from it. I question whether the voters of this town would vote themselves an increased amount of sales tax because we can't figure out how to do a balanced budget.
Okay. So here's another approach. We're dealing with $6.1 million in revenue. Say it increases at least the inflation rate, which is somewhere between 3% and 5%. So it's going to go up $300,000, let's say, to 6.5. The expense side would certainly do that. So you get into these arguments about decreasing the rate of growth in the expense number. So if you were budgeting to grow by 5% each, like in general, can you go to each department head and figure out a way to keep that frozen so that the revenues catch up to the expense? I think that's what you're getting at. And you ask management, department head by department head, and the general manager, the city manager, to come up with an expense side clamp down on cost increases that, you know, there's no way getting around inflation, which is also tied in with the payroll increases that we have. I don't know. That sort of implies payroll. If we're not going to, when we really can't reduce the rates people are paid, you're actually talking about getting into cutting staff to actually make that work.
I think
there is the hard choice.
Well, I think there are many steps first. I think the first thing to notice is we got into these large pay raises because of that logic. The logic said, hey, look, we'll keep expenses relatively the same with these increased salaries for staff. We'll lose 400 the first year, 300, 200, then 100, because expenses will stay relatively the same and revenues will go up by inflation plus a little bit.
Right, and you're suffering from sticker shock in that the budget deficit didn't increase the expected amount. Yeah.
It didn't go down, it went up. And that begs the question, where is the inflation in expense side of things? Where are expenses? Because salaries didn't change from last year to this year. We already made them in last year's budget. And in this year's budget, salaries are flat. Where are expenses exploding? And I don't think it's all in pension funds. I would go back to the department heads and say, hey, look, I don't have a regret that we made the increases to salaries, given our large contingency fund. I don't regret that at all. What is confounding is it appears revenues have gone up some, but somehow expenses have gone up even more, and it's not salaries because they've been flat. So, because they were already increased in last year's budget. Where is this large increase in expenses coming from? And I don't know. That's want to come back to you all and say, hey, look, would you please look? And come back to us and say, no, well, before we look at salary, either trimming salaries or staff reduction, it doesn't make any sense if staff was flat and salaries were flat and yet expenses skyrocketed, that it's not in salaries, it's someplace else. And
so does that involve an audit then or something, or that kind of stuff? Do we got to do another audit or something to really break it down to find out where it is?
My past history goes to, you go to the people who've got the experience living with the budgets. You go to the department heads and ask the city manager to sit down with the department heads and say, just take a look. and go, how do we find our way forward such that our answer to our inability to have a balanced budget is, well, we need to raise taxes again? Because that's also a train that you can't keep hitting. And it's just seems that this would be a timely moment to go, look, let's take 60 days and come back and have a look and see what's possible. Because you know, that's micromanaging the numbers is not a strategy that I think is effective. It's go back to the department heads who live with the numbers and the people every day and the projects and the equipment associated with it and who know this stuff like the back of their hands and go, look, you all tell us, how do we move forward here? And is there any other way other than, well, raise taxes again in another area? Because something doesn't add up to me, and I don't know what it is. And that's kind of my bottom line.
Well, it's something like, okay, and then this is, I'm a little worried about the economy, so I'm not really sure it's a given that we're going to have 3 to 5% growth on the revenue side. I'm a little worried about, I'm a little worried about that, in which case, on the expense side, we're going to be forced to make cuts. So it's one of those things where we have no choice. But assuming revenue growth is in that 3 to 5, maybe even more range, but this is a 3 to 5% range. Can the department head and the city manager limit the growth of expenses to in sort of a 1% range? Can they do that for 1 year? And that, yeah, they really have to they basically have to sit down and really analyze what they're doing and their different minutia with respect to costs and combine. And if we were to actually have an expense side budget that is limited to 1%, have the projected growth on revenue plus the TOT tax kicking in, we could be balanced. But yes, I agree, it's the people that are familiar with these details have to put together a budget that does that. And it might be time to force that issue, because I just think we have to be prepared for disappointing revenues is what I'm really worried about that. Sort of a slight to maybe more than slight recession. Yeah, so you're going to want that to be an agenda item? Future agenda item? We'll talk about that future agenda, but is that what you're hinting at?
Is that the way to handle this? Okay. Yes, thank you.
Okay. In the meantime, we do have an adjusted budget, and there's no doubt we have to move forward with this. And so, if we could get a motion, John, it's number 03.
Is it 03?
Yep.
All right, so a motion to approve a resolution of the City Council of the City of Mount Shasta adopting a revised operating budget for fiscal year 2023 to 2024 for resolution CCR 24-03, title only.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, budget revision CCR-24-03 passes. All right, let's move on to somewhat lighter topic. Let's see, is it lighter? Number 10, first reading of ordinance CCO-24 number to be determined, amending municipal code chapter 7.60.010, designation of very high fire hazard severity zones, and Chief of Police Robert Gibson will give the report on this.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The current ordinance for high fire severity zones hasn't been updated since 1995. It's very difficult to read for a layperson. It's broken down in grids, rangeships, townships, that kind of stuff. Sitting down with the fire chief, Corey Burns, we had to go find the map so that we could actually find, and it was a little difficult for us as well. This came about with our new camping ordinance that we're in the preparation of developing. One of the things is it refers to high severity fire zones as far as camping and storing of property. So I sat down with the fire chief and he looked at the areas designated by the California Fire Marshal as high fire areas around the city of Mount Shasta. And we developed the zones were developed through the Zone Haven, which is now called Genesis, which is our fire evacuation map. Basically what these do is these are the zones that are very high severity zones for fire. We're just now adding zones that were not initially there. There's all of the south part of town was never even mentioned in our high severity zones, so the Roseburg property, all of that's not on there. So what this does is bring our map, our high severity zones in concurrence with how it's mapped out by the fire marshal and how we have it mapped out in Zone Haven. So anybody can go on, look at our high severity fire zones, look at the Genesis map, and know exactly what we're talking about.
Thank you, Chief. Questions about this one? No? No? All right. Well, we are going to have a public hearing. Do we have to call it a public hearing? Public comment. All right. Public comment regarding the first reading of ordinance regarding very high fire hazard severity zone. We have two people in the audience. Do you want to comment on this? No. We'll come on up and
You mentioned camping, so camping is real big around here, so I'm not clear on what areas. Are these going to be like Twin Arrows by the river, or is this could be places where people usually make campfires?
All of these areas are located within the city limits of Mount Shasta, so it has no impact on the camping outside of the city limits.
Oh, good. Okay, that was my only question. So it's in the residential areas? That's a great idea. Okay, thank you so much.
okay, thank you for being interested. Anybody on Zoom? Okay. Bring it back to council for more discussion, if there is any. This is basically a academic fair here, so.
So we're on, what is this, 03 again?
No, this is going to be determined, right? Because
To be
it's a
determined.
it's a first reading.
First reading, gotcha, okay. So anyways, motion to approve an ordinance of the city council, the city of Mount Shasta, amending section 7.60.010 of the Mount Shasta Municipal Code, title only.
Second.
I'm sorry, if you could amend your motion to approve the first reading and move it to a second reading by title.
Oh, sorry. So motion to approve the first reading of an ordinance of the city council of the city of Mount Shasta, amending section 7.60.010 of the Mount Shasta Municipal Code to a second reading by title only.
Second.
There we go.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, that moves to the second reading. And now we move on to a very favored subject, snow removal. So, agenda item number 11, discussion and possible action regarding cost for removal of snow and clearing sidewalks within the downtown parking district. Public Works Director Ken Kellogg has the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Currently, businesses within the downtown business district pay a $12 annual fee to cover the costs of snow removal and sidewalk clearing. The origin of this fee is unclear and hasn't been increased since its inception. The City Council requested the staff determine the actual cost so they could consider recouping the city's cost. Last winter, 22-23, the city spent $46,573 on contractors hauling the center plowed snow, hauling it to the old mill site. An additional $48,529 was expended through force account, city crew efforts, loader, dump trucks, personnel, hauling snow to the same location. In addition to that, the city spent approximately $26,133 in crew time, labor, and equipment clearing all the downtown sidewalks. So again, using the last winter as a typical winter, which it wasn't typical, but it will give you an idea of costs. Labor and equipment cost the city a total of $121,235 to haul all the snow away from downtown and to plow the sidewalks. Half of this cost is reimbursed by the state of California, reducing the city's final cost for this additional service to $60,618. There are approximately 178 businesses that currently pay the $12 as part of their business license. So looking at breaking down the cost per business license, as we do right now with the $12 annually, for last winter, the cost would have been $60,618 divided by 178, or roughly $340 a year instead of $12. Another way this could be distributed, and the way some towns actually do this, is on a square footage basis. Instead of actually just per business, it's the square footage of that business. There's roughly 251,000 square feet included in those 178 businesses. That would be a cost of 24 cents per square foot per year. Again, this cost projection is preliminary. It would need to be examined on a regular basis and adjusted as necessary on a yearly basis. But as you can see, the city is currently well short of recouping their costs for snow removal downtown. The additional work of plowing to the center of the road, hauling that snow off, and clearing the sidewalks.
Thank you for that presentation, Ken. Questions? This is clarifying question time?
It is.
Yeah.
Ken, can you give me your opinion in an allocation strategy of flat rate per business or a square footage based allocation, which way you see is more fair and reasonable for the businesses?
Square footage. And the reason I say that is you look at some of those, the office building, corner of Alma and Mount Shasta Boulevard. Right. You know, there's some businesses there that don't even have 100 square feet. Other businesses have 2,000 square feet.
Right.
They run a lot more people through there. That parking's a lot more important to them than the fellow with a 100 square foot office. It would seem to make sense to me to...
Yeah, I thought that, but I thought it wise to just ask you and get because, yeah, that seems to make sense. That's my only question.
Just my only question is on you're talking about, where is it? Sorry, the 340 per year that the 178 businesses broke down to based on last year's snow removal. Being that was obviously beyond abnormal for us, is there any chance of getting some numbers maybe based on 22, 23, 21, 22 winters where, and kind of like what we're going through this year, where maybe we've had one snow removal so far and we're waiting for that, 4 feet we get over 2 days at the end of January, at the beginning of February. It's been a little bit more normal.
And you could kind of use 340 as the upper end, definitely.
No, but I mean, just in some of those situations, maybe would it be more like half as much as snow removal? Just because those winters were less winter?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at this last week's storm. I mean, if that had all been snow, we'd be darn close to what we were doing last winter. Given that it was all rain, I suspect, of course, the year's only half over, but we'll probably half the cost of last winter.
Okay.
I would say that's probably more than norm.
Last year we were doing snow removal from November to April, which was unheard of. At least, well, just in my years of being open with the business, there's not been, pardon my French, but shit for winter for most of those years. I mean, the first 2 years I was open, we didn't even have a ski park, so there was no snow removal then going on. But I'm just saying, last year, it's not normal what we had. So just the sticker shock of 340 per year compared to 12, I know you're saying upper end, but is that really just going down the road? Are we looking more like 170 then?
Yes, the
Less
reason
than
I
that,
used the 22, 23 is because we had real good numbers. We tracked real good numbers for that, and it would be harder to go back in the past and pull as accurate.
Yeah, I
but we could.
said the wrong years. Yeah, it'd be 21, 22, 20, 21.
Yeah.
Right in there.
And again, having lived here over 30 years, last year was more than normal, but it certainly wasn't anywhere close to some of the big years we've had.
I know the old boys in my place have been talking about the glory days of 30 years ago when the ski park was open at Thanksgiving. But
15 years ago,
we're
I can
past
go
those
back
days.
15 years and find some big
we're past
stores.
those days.
But yeah, the future, I suspect those big years, the glory days. I mean, you talk to the Gino Marconis, they used to snow ski down Orem Street. Okay,
No,
those
I
days
wish
are
I
gone.
could have been here for some of that.
That's
I've only
not
been
coming
here 20
back.
plus myself, but just if I get any sticker shock from other business owners confronting me on this, I just want to let them know that
That's definitely the high end.
Was just based on
I'd say
winter.
Yes. Just
Then any
a
potential
wag.
number down the road could be much
A
less
wag,
than
I'd
that.
say 150 and 180
Okay.
would be something you could expect.
I hope we get back to the point where the ski park is open at Thanksgiving, but it just doesn't seem to be the norm anymore.
So this question is for Muriel regarding this. The $12, does that go into a separate fund outside of the general fund budget, the overall general fund budget, like beautification fund or what?
No, it's a general revenue.
So, dare I say, in certain years, the overall city budget subsidizes these businesses with respect to snow removal. Yeah. So, so before we go to public comment, for clarification, staff wants some direction on this, right? Because I don't see this as a resolution yet. Okay. Let's go to public comment. 2 people in the audience, would you like to come up and speak on this snow removal issue? Come on up.
I would say that you are not going to ever see those old days of no snowfall. I think the drought is over, and this is going to be the new normal like it was before. So you are going to have to plan for that, for the extra snowfall. And I do think y'all need to raise that from $12 for sure. And the square footage sounds very fair. I think the business owners would go with that. I support you in that.
Thank you. One more point of clarification. Is this something that has to be voted on by the people being the fee holders? No? You sure?
No.
Okay. Zoomland.
We do have a hand raised. Our first speaker will be Johanna.
All right, Johanna, you know the drill.
Hi, good evening. I want to say I agree with the square footage that Ken suggested. That would definitely be more fair because of the different sizes of properties. I think $12 is incredibly low and must have been done to help subsidize and incent businesses to be there. That is, as you probably all know, that is not a realistic cost in any way to get anyone to plow sidewalks or haul away snow. And I had a thought, what about perhaps, because snowfall is variable, and I think this year, unfortunately, if you look at the 45-day forecast, there's not much more snow anticipated. And so maybe there's a base amount, like maybe people get charged, $125, and that might cover, still be kind of low, but might cover 2 snowfalls. And then if there's more, you have a variable schedule. You have a variable rate. If there's more than 2 snowfalls, then you charge additional or something like that. Anyway, it's just a thought to maybe make it more palatable for the business owners so that they're not being charged the $300 every year. And, but also so that the city doesn't lose money on this proposition. So, and since it's just for the downtown, that's, I think, all I'm gonna say on that for now.
Thank you, Johanna. Anybody?
you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us back to council for further discussion. Go ahead.
Sorry, one more question, Ken. Now that 178 businesses you mentioned, does that include the south end of town with Casa Ramos and all them that we
No,
applied for?
No, that was a separate
Gotcha.
proposal we were looking at.
Well, the staff is looking for direction on where to go with a situation where a fee is, dare I say, absurdly low for a special service. Comments? Thoughts?
Just a brief one.
Yeah.
There's an aspect to how this money might be collected. It's been flat rate, and everybody just paid their $12 and went into the general fund, and then the general fund paid for last year's $60,000, our net bit of center snow removal to contractors. And using square footage seems to be clearly the way to be fair about this to the businesses. But to John's point about sticker shock, and should it be a flat rate, or should this be billed? I think the term is in arrears, where
Fee for service.
Yeah, where it's just, you know, if it's a low year, well, it's a low bill, and once the season's over and we know how much that is, we know the state's gonna pay a half, and then the bills go out. And so, yeah, the city has to pay the contractors, so we have a float of a few months to 5 months where we pay before businesses pay us back, but that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Does that make sense to you?
It makes great sense to me. The charge would be figured out after the snow season and billed accordingly.
Yeah.
And I'd have to check with Muriel, but would it be a separate bill, or it would just be in a coming year's business license fee?
We can do it either way.
Well, I'm feeling a little consensus here. What do you got, John?
Just one more thing with the contractor services as far as the snow removal itself. Is there any way to just cut that down a little bit through the city doing it? Or, I mean, or is that still just going to be the same basic cost, whether it's employees or on overtime or the contractor services?
It costs more to contract it out.
Okay.
On the other hand, it's such a seldom needed service, it makes no sense to try to staff up with people and equipment to do it with our city crews. So.
But even if paying overtime is substantially less?
There is city overtime. Even with that, we're probably less. I'd have to check for sure, but yeah, even with city overtime, we're less than paying the contractors regular time, their regular rate to haul. But we only have the one dump truck, and we're usually running.
That was going to be my other question, is actually how many dump trucks for that?
We're running 4 or more.
It takes, what, 4 to do the contractor service?
To make the route.
Rotating the way they're
and to do it efficiently where you're keeping both loaders working and not sitting.
Yeah.
We're running at least 4 trucks.
Okay.
The south end of town project, again, this is all, you want to do this in a practically short time. You know, if we did Fort Count, it would take us 2 weeks. We want to get that snow out of there within
No, we don't want 2 weeks.
2 days. So we just have to contract it.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, I'm going to move to give staff direction to come back to council with a fee for service snow removal plan. In other words, look at the cost of doing this for the current district at $12 and come up with a resolution where the businesses in that district are billed for the actual costs on a square footage basis. In other words, small businesses would pay less than the larger businesses. The rate would be based on what the costs are. So it would be a matter of coming up with a formula based on the square footage per business.
Is there any way we can see some numbers from other cities as well as what they charge? Some of the other snow cities, is that a possibility?
I
mean,
that would mean you'd have to find cities with special snow plowing districts.
Actually, if you look at that last report, for the south end of town, I pulled out some numbers for
Mammoth and Truckee.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And they actually have assessment. That's the way they handle it, is assessment districts.
Okay.
And I can't remember what the per business cost was, but it was substantial for
But it was in that
both
last
cities.
report back then? Okay. Go look at notes.
Do we have consensus on my motion? Because it's not,
No, we don't need a motion, we just tell them to do it.
no, right. Do you agree that it's good direction for this, for staff? All right, so looking at billing for service, cost of service, post-season, based on square footage. So come up with a formula, and we'll take a look at it. All right, so let's move on to item number 12. Okay, so this one is discussion on possible action regarding wildfire prevention messaging. City manager is going to present this item.
So you may remember that Pat Titus, retired Cal OES, was here speaking about wildfire prevention back in November, and his main points were making sure that we get the notice out on days where we expect high wildfire danger, to be looking at signing certain trails in the city, to not start fires, and to ensure that trees under power lines are trimmed. So a couple things. First is that the wildfire messaging, now that we have Civic Plus in place, the fire department, police department can put out on social media about high fire days and make sure that's, put out as soon as we get that information. Two, the idea, talking it over with staff, the idea of signing some of our trails saying, hey, don't start fires. To me, the majority of people, that live here, that are housebroken adults, get it. They understand you're not, in a high fire season, you're not lighting any matches, you're not doing anything that's going to trigger a fire. My concern is by putting out signs in some of these areas that the folks that are not particularly housebroken may incent them out of spite or just out of delinquency to start fires. So I don't know if that's really all that helpful on that point. And then finally, trees under power lines. I'm in contact with our regional representative at PAC Power and about getting our trees trimmed in the city and outside of the city under our power lines. So that's already, that process has already started. So I just want to make sure that we close the loop on this item. So if you guys have any questions, comments.
Mr. Collins, any questions about signage regarding fire prevention?
Just briefly,
does the state provide standardized signage for trailheads and places that people head off into the wilderness? Don't they already have this?
Not on the trails themselves, but usually when you get to a trailhead, there's a large message board. There's usually something there, and that's pretty standard.
Yeah, and that's already there.
Yeah, and so that makes sense. Actually putting signs out on the trail, I don't think it's going to incent anybody that has common sense to...
Thank you.
Mr. Redmond, trail signs.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as you put it, they're housebroken or they're not. They get it or they don't.
How many trails are actually inside the city jurisdiction that aren't part of the rec district? Shasta's Park is their issue, their problem. Same thing here. We have a possible trailhead down at the east side of the landing that hasn't been finished yet.
It hasn't. That's what I'm mostly thinking of.
Rockfell, the end of Rockfell, I don't think that's our area.
Right.
I'm not really sure how pertinent this is to us. Something should have been addressed to Shannon Shaw here at the rec district. But anyhow, public comment time? Yeah.
Yeah.
Our audience of 2, would you like to speak on this item? Come on up.
My comment is about the signage and about the assumption about people will either be angry at the sign. I'm thinking about actually in the county. I know in the city, I agree, you don't really need the signs. But I do hope that you have more signage out specifically like at Twin Arrows and those places, because those people disregard, because there is no presence, there's no signs. I actually contacted you guys about that last year because there's no signs. And in the height of all the heat, they were having fires, and because there was no presence at all. So maybe, I guess that's a county area out there, right? But if you could have more signs, I think we would really like that. There was a lot of, I would say there was like 5 fires a night during the height of the temperature. So, thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I believe we're talking about Forest Service land there. Anybody in Zoom land? No? All right. Back to council for any thoughts, opinions, direction.
To the chair.
Go ahead.
Just if we do any signs in town here on the trails, maybe no syringes either put on there. Just throwing that out there.
Okay. Any thoughts? My only thought, this goes back to what I was saying, I'm not really sure where the city gets involved with this in any detail. The idea of putting signs out on the trails kind of takes away from the ambiance of, well, we're not in the city, but just the idea of putting more signs on trails out besides the trailhead seems to be defeating the purpose of being in nature. But yeah, it's just, to me, it's just a non-starter since we don't really manage many trails unless Spring Hill right here, okay, so that's us. That's about it that I can think of. Is that actual city land or is that incorporated? Okay, so Spring Hill, there's a trail that goes from over here to the top. I'm not really feeling it with respect to any sort of direction. You? Nope. We have nothing here. We'll just move on to item number 13. I don't have anything to report myself. Outside meetings. John doesn't have anything. You don't have anything? Okay. Move on to future agenda items. I'm not going to read through the list. It is getting a little smaller. That's good. Do we want to have a balanced budget presentation, a future agenda item for June? What's realistic? You want it to be at the end of March. I think that's a little... 60 days.
Really? Muriel, what do you think? Is that asking a little too much? That would be the end of March for a balanced budget.
Mandated by the state to have a budget approved by the end of June.
All right, well, how about the initial preliminary budget by the end of April? As a future agenda item.
Yeah, I realize that the normal process is to have
And you've asked for a 2-year budget.
Oh, yes, don't forget that. Then we formalize that.
Right. Well, and so the budget specifically that I'm asking for is just next year's budget early. When we get to June, it would be 2 years of budget. But the tough part isn't year 2. The tough part is a balanced budget next year in year 1, and to just focus on that and go through the exercise with the department heads or the experts in their areas. And I'm really grateful we have the people as heads that we do.
I hate to butt in, Jeff.
But you're the mayor. You can.
But yeah, but I forgot that we opted for 2-year budget cycles. So by doing that, to now put staff under pains of coming up with a 1-year budget, I'm not sure that makes sense anymore.
Well, it would still be the budget for June. It would just be the first of 2.
But it's a 2-year budget, meaning that, yeah, the front side could be bad or vice versa, and the second year could be good or bad.
Should we look at it?
It's a 2-year budget, and therefore, that's what gets presented to us by the end of June. So maybe what you're really asking for is either one, a hypothetical or theoretical, whatever, budget for 25 that doesn't really count per se, meaning that that's not what we're going to vote on because we've decided to do 2-year budgets. Or would you prefer to say that you want a balanced budget by year 2 of this budget cycle, since we've decided to do 2-year budgets?
In a nutshell, guys, over the next 5 months, we are going to vote yes or no on lots of ways that this town will spend money.
Right.
I would like to know as soon as possible how bad is next year gonna be, and or can we move to a place where, wow, okay, our department heads have said, we will propose a balanced budget year 1 of the 2-year cycle, and we think we can stick with this. It won't get approved. There may be some negotiation between now and June when we have to approve it, but folks, feel good about approving projects and the stuff that we end up voting on that spends money, because, hey, here's a plan where we can break even starting next year. And that's because I don't want to have to go to the knee-jerk reaction of just, oh my God, it's heading in the wrong direction, vote no on everything. And because we don't know what next year's going to look like.
Yeah, but we opted for the 2-year budget.
So maybe
plan.
just a thought here on the, since we have the 2-year outlook that we want now, maybe instead of coming forth with a balanced budget, maybe some staff head or heads of staff recommendations, department head recommendations on things to cut from the budget that aren't personnel right now, because we're trying to avoid the personnel cuts, but maybe just some department cuts, and then look at that instead of just like, okay, here's the budget for 2 years, maybe just start with some cuts and see what that looks like.
And that's great. That is certainly a tough and key
Before
part.
we go, they hit us with numbers and like, well, what if we just start cutting this? What if they come to us with some stuff maybe they can't cut?
The piece that's missing is the revenue. Do we have any idea what's going to happen to revenue in the next 12 months? And because if revenue does go up by 3% or 5%, and they come back and go, well, no, we can't make any cuts, but we can keep it stable and not increase them for next year. And Muriel tells us, in conjunction with the city manager and department heads, hey, look, we think it's a good bet, a reasonable bet, that revenue is going to go up by 4% or 5%. That equals roughly $300,000 to $400,000. And if expenses stay the same, hey, guess what? We have a balanced budget. We're good. But I don't know that. And for the next 5 months, we're going to write checks. We're going to approve stuff that costs money. And I think, given the fact that we're looking at $1 million losing over the past 2 years, we need to know as soon as possible where are we? What direction are we headed in? Because this is a short train if it keeps on this line. That's all. And guys, look,
Well, we could just rescind the 2-year budget plan and just go back to regular 1-year budgets. And then, so you do that, step one, then step two, you say, we vote on whether we are insisting on a balanced budget for 25.
Yeah, if we did this earlier, we would already know what next year's budget was looking like. In other words, at the beginning of this year, we approved this budget and next year's budget. We would already know, and that was the whole impetus to do it. But now we're in a mid-year reality gut check of, oh no, we're going to lose $520,000 this year. And again, I'm not asking in 60 days for 2 years of budgets. I'm just asking for the next budget, just 1 year of budget.
Okay, but we wouldn't be voting on that. We'd be voting on the 2-year budget at the end of June. So what you're asking for is a realistic projection of what's going to happen, and then we would take that information and say to staff, adjust accordingly to make the 2-year cycle less deficit-oriented? Is that what you're getting at? Or do you really want 25, the next fiscal year, to be balanced, in which case we ought maybe to go back to just one-year budgets?
Whether we go back to 1-year budgets or not, and I'm not necessarily, I think that just kind of sits over on the side for the moment. For me, the most critical thing is we're burning through $500,000 burning cash like crazy.
Yeah.
It would be really swell to have an idea what in next year's revenues and can department heads hold.
Jeff, that's a projection. I'm not sure that that's so difficult to do. Okay, but that's a projection. So in 2 months, Muriel could come to us with a projection. I project that revenue will go up. Muriel's usually very conservative on this, 2%. So it's going to be 6.3 million, something like that. And that expenses are going to go up 5%. So yeah, the deficit's going to increase.
Yeah.
That would be the projection. At that point, council could say, we need to do something.
Well, right.
It's more severe or serious.
That. Yeah, because
well, do you have a problem putting together a projection? Okay, that's different than a budget, Jeff.
Yeah, we're not approving a budget in less than 60 days.
Well, we're not going to vote on it, Mariel. You're going to show us the numbers.
It's going to be projections, but that's what the budget is.
Anyhow, right? Yeah. Right. It's not hard and fast, and then mid-year we make changes like we just did. Yeah, granted, but I think the heart of what Jeff is getting at is how bad is it going to be?
Right, next year. That's just as soon as we can, so we can start.
And if it is going to be as bad as you're worried about, and I'm worried about the revenue because I think I'm a little worried about recession, we're going to have to make serious budgetary adjustments, mostly on the expense side, right? All right, well, let's put that down as a future agenda item then for a fiscal 25 budget projection to council by, this is second meeting in March. Thank you, Muriel. Okay. Do you have any future agenda items? No. All right. The only one I'm thinking of, Todd, is, and I'm just going to do this as mayor, expanding the EIFD boundaries, since we're apparently going to lose parcels related to the county not participating, and they're not, these parcels, especially the one Shasta parcels, are not part of the EIFD.
Yep.
And we have no idea if annexation is going to be definite. So we can, if we do end up annexing one Shasta parcels somewhere down the line, we could then put them back into a separate EIFD or the current one later when it actually.
We just, if we're adding parcels, we'd need to.
Okay, so here's what I couldn't remember when I was talking to you before about grant funds for something. It was the grant monies that Siskiyou Economic Development helped get for Cosmont, to pay for Cosmont. We actually
Yes.
received it, yeah.
Yes.
So question is there some money left over for there to do more EIFD changes?
There is. I mean, all it really involves is adding the additional parcels and coming back and revoting on the EIFD.
Okay, I'm going to put down as a future agenda item.
Okay.
Okay, I want, thank you. And I'm focusing on all the parcels north of Spring Hill, and that's a lot of acreage, and it would be a wash versus the one Shasta acreage that we would lose. Just to let you know, my thought is that for the EIFD to be successful, we have to have valuation improvements within those acres. And it's a very long-term process, but if it does work, then the TIF would eventually be substantial, and this could take 10, 15 years, but it would be substantial enough to not just pay for the infrastructure improvements of those developments, but help something like, and my favorite entity is the Mount Shasta Recreation Department, because they are way underfunded. So that's a general infrastructure community service that the EIFD parcels would benefit from the improvement of. So that's me being fully open about what the hope is. But that's very long-term, because the TIF, without county involvement, we're talking about 7% of valuation improvements, and that's small if it's just the 100 acres. There's 127 acres at the landing. About 100 is developable. The rest is either wetlands or too steep.
Yes.
And yeah, the TIF on that is going to, unless we get really lucky and some robotic manufacturing place comes in that's super valuable, it's going to be a slow road.
Very much.
And less TIF money to use on different things. So that's it for future agenda items, and I am going to adjourn the meeting. Okay, we are finished today at 8:18.